Welcome everyone to the second session of our webinar series. How can you build relationships for power? From lone wolf activists to the robust community. Next slide. This webinar is being presented to you by People Power Health. Our goal is to build a learning community of healthcare professionals to help effectively organize and respond to each other, our patients, and the ever-changing needs of our communities. Let me introduce you to our Executive Director, Peja Stoyachek. He is also our lead trainer. Samuel Gonzalez, Project Manager and Trainer. Nevena Basic, our Admin and Technical Guru. And again, my name is Brian Archie, Trainer and Community Manager. Next slide. So just in welcoming you today, we would like to ask that, we know that there are some technology issues, but to the best of your ability, if you could keep your cameras on so that we can see your smiling faces and we can hopefully have a better interaction and learning opportunity. If you're not speaking, to please keep your mic on mute just to keep out any background noises or things like that. To use the hand raise feature, and if Nevena will demonstrate that for you, the hand raise feature and the chat box, maybe for any questions that you want to uplift or any comments or moments that you may have, questions that you want to interject with. Next slide. So we at People Power Health, we acknowledge that there are many avenues to learning the art of organizing and leadership. Our core training pedagogy is based upon the community organizing methods developed by Professor Marshall Ganz at the Harvard Kennedy School. For those that don't know Marshall, he has over 30 years of experience organizing with the Cesar Chavez Farmers Movement, and he was active in the Mississippi Summer Project in 1968. Next slide. So this is the brief agenda that we'll be sharing with you today. And again, welcome to this learning community. We'll have an overview of HEART, which is a program, a fellowship that we will be offering in October, and we'll have a short video to introduce that. Our lecture today, or conversation, will be around what are relationships. There'll be a short one-on-one video, really to model what our discussion is about. Then there'll be a closing and call to action. For every meeting that we typically start, whether it's in-house or with others, we like to have a check-in question, really just to lighten and brighten the mood and just to share a little bit about ourselves and maybe what we value. So today's check-in question is, if you had a superpower, what would it be? And I invite you to put those answers or responses into the chat. I'll just say off the top, most people say they want to fly, and I agree. So thank you. Next slide, Nevena.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome everybody.
So I will turn it over to Peja to discuss with you the basis of HEART and why healthcare professionals can also be organizers. Peja, take it over.
So my name is, as Brian said, my name is Peja Stoyachek, and I'm an executive director of People Power Health. Aside from the webinar series that we are doing today, next Tuesday, and then the Tuesday after, we also want to introduce the health activism and reflection training that we're going to launch in the fall. That is actually a little bit more than just a training, because it's an initiative with an aim to increase clinician-led activism and community organizing efforts to advance health equity and justice. And the curriculum that we created for HEART, for the health activism and reflection training, is there to address like couple of things that we faced as clinicians. I'm a clinician myself. I'm a physician, and our current healthcare system, the way it is organized, is in many cases making us feel powerless and divided into our own organizational spaces, into our own kind of divided places where we cannot bring our full selves into it. And I felt that multiple times through my career, and I know I've heard that from a lot of clinicians around the country. That is one of the biggest challenges to their activism, is that they are not allowed to actually do stuff, nor bring their full values and practices and stories and inspiration into their professional spaces. The second thing is that as much as our medical training is good, we don't get the training how to address some of the structural problems that we face, especially the problems that are happening in the community. So we are trained really well to address medical issues of our patients, but when it comes to social issues that they face, we don't get an official training how to do that. And community organizing and activism can teach us that. And we are building this community and this initiative to address some of those things. And then finally, last but not the least, that the way activism is practiced in most cases is this lone wolf style of advocacy. We call it a lone wolf because it's a you do it alone. It's expected for you as a doctor, as a nurse, as a social worker to do most of the work of advocating for your communities and for your patients by yourself. And we're trying to challenge that and really bring a new way of doing things, which requires building a community around you, engaging other people, and feeling less lonely, and therefore hopefully address some of the issues like burnout and disengagement that happens to many people who are in this space of health advocacy and activism. So this is the beginning of our journey in many ways, and we're going to send you more information and more details about the health activism and reflection training coming in the fall. But for now, I think you're going to get a preview of one particular practice, like storytelling, that Brian is going to introduce, that we cover in more details during the training and this program. So back to you, Brian, and thank you.
Thank you, Preja. Next slide, Nevena. And so our learning goals for today, or what we would like to have as key takeaways, are for us to learn why relationships are the foundation of our work, to learn how to build public relationships through the one-on-one meeting. And again, we will talk about those steps and watch a short video. And then to learn how to get to scale through our relational networks. Next slide. So what are relationships? Raise your hand, I mean, if you've ever had or been in a relationship. I see someone has, okay. So relationships are foundations to us as human beings. We have and encounter many different kinds throughout our life and work. You know, some are about being liked or loved, really when it pertains to our family or friends. And others are relationships that we form with our patients, colleagues, or students in a professional sense. What these relationships actually have in common, though, is that they are close, personal, and bounded. So if I were to ask, you know, what conditions do you think we need to build intentional relationships? And if you could drop any of those answers in the chat. Thank you. And next slide. So when we begin to think in terms of civic engagement or the Democracy Project, there's a radical idea of individualism that is swept across the nation. The problem with this is that the only way to build a true democracy is to really start with building the power of the people. And again, relationships is the fundamental piece to this work. So, you know, if I were to ask you, are we building relationships out of commonality or out of difference? What would your response be? So I would posit that we could actually do both, but we can leave that for a little bit of discussion later. Relationships are built on common values, resources, and shared interests. When we begin to build relationships by exploring the values and interests of each other, and as we grow the relationships, the resources actually become less the focus because we have built this relationship like to sustain, and it has started to gain value and kind of taken on a life of its own. There is an exchange, but we're like actually, you know, building something that will move past whatever the original instances that we came together for. So if you were to think about, you know, looking at this slide and think about the last time that you built a relationship. Like what stands out for you? What pieces of this can you pick up that you actually remember going through that relationship process? And next slide. So there are several different kinds of relationships, specifically when we're talking about in the context of community organizing. So there is public versus private, strong versus weak ties, and then informal versus formal. One of the most prevalent questions that we get is like, what is strong and weak ties? Like, I don't understand that concept. And it really boils down to like the strong ties are the folks that are within your circle, within your bubble, people that you talk with or build with on a daily basis. And weak ties are really just simply those that are not. And a great example of that is if you think about like social media and having Facebook followers. Many people that have those typically will be interacting with the same individuals, sharing posts, liking things, that they have interest in, or shares their values or connects their value sets together. And others outside of that, you really wouldn't see or know, because they're again they're not into or doing things that have interest to you. So like a person with 1,000 followers, they may not actually know them, right? As opposed to the person with a smaller amount, and they're actually exchanging information and resources back and forth. And they may actually be able to see those folks face to face. So if I ask, when we do community organizing, what type of relationships do you think we would need? Well, to really go ahead and respond to that, the key takeaway that is that in order to organize and maximize the power that we want to build within community, we want to have a public, right, a civic relationship. We want the ties to be weak, meaning that we may not know these people, we're not meeting with them on a daily basis, they are not in our networks. We're in fact pushing out our network and pulling others on the inside, right? And that helps us build capacity and scale. And then we'd like to have informal relationships, again, because these aren't folks that we're readily dealing with on a daily basis. And this would allow us to strengthen our organizing campaign as we begin it. Next slide. So again, just to remind, so the fundamental building blocks of relational strategy, right, starts with the individual. And again, that's that one-on-one meeting that we're going to show you shortly via video. Individuals are connected to others though, right? Meaning that people, networks, and or are attached to organizations, and we are able to reach out to them. Their networks or organizations have the potential to become available to us in a different way. Again, building capacity, getting us to scale, sharing resources, and if we are being intentional, as we know that this is the key, finding some long-lasting relationships to hold on to within community. Next slide, please. So this slide here, like what's happening? Like why is building relationships scary? Does anyone have a thought on that? Rejection? Well, that's definitely a thing. Can anyone think of a way that we can actually manage the anxiety of building the relationships up? Small talk, connecting through other people. These are some possibilities, but I also have another thought. It's not just the scariness of the individual actually maybe saying no to us, from our request to meet or what have you. Once the individual actually comes, like maybe to that one-on-one meeting, and we begin the process, it actually obligates us to go through with our request, right? So we find out right then and there, like if we're all in, because we've actually invited someone else to join the campaign or join the group. And it's like, oh, wow, you want to come on board? Now I have to do something, And so sometimes it tests us and our value sets and puts us in a place of, like that fight or flight type of thing. The idea though, is that we make this experience relational, looking for ways to find common ground and values that will allow us to see if what we are trying to build will actually work with that individual during the one-on-one process. Next slide, please. So just to lift up, to build a relationship, an essential practice of that is the one-on-one meeting. So what we'd like to do here with this slide is to really look into the components or schema or framework to logically understand exactly what the one-on-one process is. And again, we have attention. This could be simply eye contact or referring to an individual that, someone has asked, like maybe we need to speak to them regarding this thing that's happening in community. Interest, and this is really like identifying why we are there talking in the first place in the one-on-one, and really seeing if, being upfront and finding out early on if this person is actually looking to maybe come on board or extend the conversation past today. Exploration is where the story of self can be very helpful in getting an individual to open up, right? Like, so sharing a bit about you and being vulnerable to build trust and share values. But let's not, be confused here. This is more about listening and giving space to an individual to find the motivation within themselves. Like there's literally a formula for this. Like this is the 80% listening, 20% talking from us. So a person, they're able to, again, to find their why, to find the motivation and hope within themselves, and then make that conscious decision on whether or not they want to really go ahead and become involved. The exchange, can be in regards to sharing information and or resources, or literally just the possibility of having something happening in the future. Nothing tangible may take place right then, but there's an idea and some thoughts around it. And let's be clear, like this is not about extorting or taking or being extractive. It is with us giving ourselves the opportunity to build with and share with another individual. And then commitment, really there is no relationship if there isn't a commitment. Whether we're talking about going on a date or showing up at a rally for someone, right? The commitment can be as simple as joining into whatever the event may be, or being able to identify like another time and place that we can meet for coffee or have lunch and go ahead and speak. Hopefully within the immediate future, this would take place. So as we begin to transition here into this video, again, to show you what modeling the one-on-one actually looks like, I really want you to hone in on and see if you can spot the key components of attention, interest, exploration, exchange, and commitment. And then we'll have a short conversation after the video plays. Next slide, Devina.
Hi, in this video, you'll see me doing a one-on-one conversation with Jeff, a potential new recruit. Pay attention to who's doing most of the talking, how I ask questions to draw out our shared values, and how I make sure to get a commitment from him so he can become more actively involved. Hi.
Hi, I'm Jeff.
Anjali, so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Did you find the coffee shop okay?
Yeah, thank you for the directions.
I'm so glad that Sarah connected us.
Yeah, me too.
You're not from Boston originally.
No, I'm not. I'm from Rockland, New York. It's the suburbs outside the city, and I came to Boston a few years ago for school.
Oh, okay. What's Rockland like?
It's really boring. There's a lot of shopping malls and parking lots, basically.
My hometown is actually Shelton, Connecticut, and sounds very similar. We have the only wiffle ball factory in the world, so it's like our one claim to fame. I'd really like to get to know you a little bit better and tell you about this organization, Boston Educators for Social Justice, that I work with, because I think there might be some interest there. When did you start caring about public education?
I feel like I've really always cared about education for a long time.
So since you were little, since you were young?
Yeah, so both my parents are immigrants, and my mom always told me that they came to this country so that I could get a good education. So she really made me take it seriously.
Yeah, both of my parents are actually immigrants too, from India. Where did your parents immigrate from?
So my dad came from Bulgaria, and my mom was born in Tunisia, and they both met in France, and then I was born in New York.
Yeah, my parents kind of sent a similar message to me. In India, education is really important. I had this one really good teacher in third grade named Mrs. Leadham, who was kind of the one teacher that made me feel really creative and heard. Did you have good teachers in your school experience?
There are a few that stand out. One for me is definitely Mr. Alexander in 8th grade, who taught English and always affirmed my writing. He was really cool, and he was just a really fun teacher too.
Sarah told me you got interested in education when you were in Philly, but it sounds like you had a good experience. When did you get interested?
They closed 24 public schools in Philly a few years ago when I was there, because they said that there wasn't enough money for public education in the city. And I volunteered for a community organization and actually got to know a lot of public school students, and they would tell me that in their schools they didn't even have enough books, they didn't have nurses or guidance counselors because of all the budget cuts. So I was like, wow, how is that possible that, I went to good public schools where we had everything we needed, and yet these students in Philly didn't have access to the most basic things.
I'm wondering why it mattered to you so much what was going on in Philly, if your own experience was a good one.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like I said, I think it really comes from what my mom used to teach me. Education is really important. Everybody should be able to have access to a good education. So I think it's not fair that some people get to have it and a lot of people don't.
I've actually gotten involved with Boston Educators for Social Justice because they're doing a lot of the work, like it sounds what was happening in Philly, trying to really get students the support that they need. So we actually are having this big training for our group on Friday, November 10th at 6 p.m. I think it sounds like it's something you would really enjoy, Jeff. Do you think you'd be able to make it that Friday?
That sounds interesting, but I'm really busy with school right now. I have papers, I have to study. I don't really have the time right now.
The meeting we're having on Friday is actually about cuts that have been made to 2 specific schools, and I think you could contribute a lot to the conversation because of this interest that you bring. And I'm actually driving there, so I could pick you up on the way to the meeting. I'll be driving right by campus. And I have your phone number. I could just text you and scoop you up on my way. Does that sound okay?
It seems like this problem is really happening everywhere, so I feel like I should get involved and do something about it. And if you could give me a ride, that would make it a lot easier for me. So, yeah.
There's some snaps to Angeli and Jeff. So if you can go back one slide, Nevin. So I just want to just uplift a few things here. Again, the 5 steps to this one-on-one process. So attention. Can anyone identify how she started off? Let's see, okay. Right, body language and eye contact, right? Front facing, welcoming demeanor, just letting Jeff know that, she was there with her whole self, to not just talk, but to listen to whatever he had to say. And then interest. Highlighting immediately, why they were meeting, or what was, what thoughts may have been swirling around in her head that she thought that he would be, he would have interest in. What about exploration? Did anyone pick up on that? Right, values. education, right? Okay, so there were some commonalities that we heard uplifted, being children of immigrant parents, the urgency around educating oneself and really being being studious, school, and then they began to kind of exchange and banter a little bit back and forth about some moments that each of them had, with their hometowns and with their families as they grew up. And the again, most important piece, that closing, that commitment. So what did Jeff do initially? Right, right. He was like, yeah, I'm not interested. I'm tired. I have homework. I have something else to do. And to Angelique's credit, like, she didn't give up, right? She came back with a point of urgency that she knew would kind of touch Jeff's value set. And then, provided the date of the event, what time it was, what was going to be happening there, and then a means to get Jeff to the space, right? Just being a resource in that manner, so that, again, we are not being extractive. We are looking to share resources to grow our capacity. So I hope that everyone that viewed was able to gain something from this, and maybe you'll spot these some these points of interest the next time you invite someone or are invited to a meeting. So next slide. So interdependent leadership model. And so it's like, how do we use relationships to build power? How do we move from that lone wolf activist organizer to the robust community? So when we talk about getting to capacity, we need a larger structure. And for us, we call this the snowflake. Now that you have learned, what the one-on-one process is, when you look at this, do you ask yourself how this was formed, or what is the glue to this structure? Right? Okay, we see people, right? But if you think about, right, starting in the center and being able to share itself out, these four people probably had one-on-ones, were able to connect values and interests and form some sort of bond or relationship. They in turn were able to bring in people from their spaces, from their networks, from their bubbles, right, to share what was going on. And this thing just kind of just spread. But the glue for this structure, for this snowflake that you'll learn later on if you join us in Heart, the glue to this is relationships. Really emphasizing, if we are intentional about building relationships with others, we will be able to make change and grow into that power that we're looking to see for ourselves and in community. So with that said, we'd like to thank you for joining us for this webinar today. And before we close, our call to action, right? Sparking interest. We hope that this may be something that you heard today resonated and you're looking to learn more. So what we'd like to do is invite you to our concluding webinar, which will be on August the 2nd at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is, what is your activism strategy? We need a power shift to win. And hopefully, again, we see you on that day at that time. And our Heart Health Activism and Reflection training actually begins on October the 4th. Our Nevena will drop registration links for both of those in the chat. And if there aren't any questions, I bid you farewell. Thank you so much for attending and learning with us today. Peace and blessings.